rock that the builders abandoned has become the cornerstone. It's a beautiful verse that Eitan Katz and Yehuda Solomon, guest appearance on his album Unplugged 3, are singing together from Psalm 118. Great to be with you, my holy sisters and brothers. Let's light up the darkness. I was at an event last night and we were singing, and you might have caught, I shared a little bit of video of Yehuda Solomon singing Shlomo Carlebach's melody for Havdalah. And while I was at that event, I taught this class. I came out of Shabbos. I prepared for this class, get everything ready, taught the class, run out to that event, sang, enjoyed it. Went home, went to bed, got up this morning. We had a class in our minyan from our Rav. And, first we did morning prayers. And then my friend who was sitting next to me says, can you believe what happened yesterday? And I was like, what happened? And I wasn't even aware of this terrible shooting. Miraculously, no one was killed in Jerusalem, right outside the old city, in a spot where I was standing and walked through just a few weeks ago. A terrorist, fired his weapon, and 8 Jews were injured, 2 of them very seriously. The tourists from New York, religious people just trying to enjoy the holiness of Jerusalem, and nearly murdered because they were Jews engaged in that holy activity. So please join me in praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for the healing of those who were injured, and that the attempted murderer should receive exactly what he deserves. We dedicate our show today to the healing of those who were injured. Who's with us on a Sunday evening? James in Indianapolis, Yehuda in South Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandor in the Bronx, Gwen in Michigan, John in Maine, Nancy in North Carolina, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Sharon in New Jersey, Christo in Lubbock, Kevin in Minnesota, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in the Great Northwest, Susie in LA, Patrice in Utah, Belle in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Chaim in Miami. Nina's filling in some details about that horrific crime. Okay. We hear about this stuff too often. It infuriates me. Nobody of any persuasion should be attacked for practicing their religion, for trying to engage in their relationship with God, for honoring the traditions of their people, etc. Such a time we live in. All right. You might also say, what do you mean, Sal? It's the history of the Jews. We've been, people, the enemies of the Jews have come out of the woodwork, seeking our lives and our debts for thousands of years. God has a purpose for that. I trust God. But we do our hishtadlus, right? God does his part, and we can rely on God to do his part, and we know he has a purpose for all the events of this world, and thank God he's made us people with limited lifetimes in this world, but we come from the world of souls and will return to the world of souls, and may we merit to understand one day beyond this life what the meaning of these events is. That's just so difficult for us to understand while we're here. Okay. Where are we holding? We are, today's daf is Lamed Tes, page 39, here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 3. This tractate is about the laws of marriage contracts. Here in chapter 3, we've been seeing how the law of the rapist and the law of the seducer intersects with the marriage contract. which obligates a husband who divorces his wife to pay a hefty settlement to the wife if she entered the marriage as a virgin. It's a very large amount of money, 200 dinars. And if she was married before, or she was a widow, she was a divorcee, then 100 dinars. But still, a very substantial amount. The rapist or the seducer of a young woman, one who is past being a minor but not yet a grown woman, has a fine to pay of 50 pieces of silver. I've been making a little bit of a mistake. Those 50 sela are the equivalent of 200 dinars, right? So that fine is the same number as the marriage contract of a woman who is a virgin. Now, it makes perfect sense, right? The rapist who renders her not a virgin for when she later gets married pays the fine that would have been the amount of her marriage contract if she was a virgin when she got married. Along the way, we've also been learning about this principle that one who is sentenced to death doesn't also pay monetary damages and other kinds of related laws. Here, the third Mishnah, which we're about to conclude today, was a discussion between Rabbi Yosei HaGalili and Rabbi Akiva, that if this woman who the rapist overpowers, that if she had been betrothed and divorced before she was raped, Rabbi Yosei says, well, the Torah said if he overpowers a woman who is not betrothed, and since she had been betrothed, so then that takes the fine off the table. He still pays damages for pain, humiliation, etc. It's just that specific fine of the rapist of a virgin he does not pay. Rabbi Akiva says he does pay it, but instead of paying it to her father, as the Torah specifies, because she's a young woman, still under the authority of her father, he pays it directly to her. So we're concluding that discussion between Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Akiva today. Regarding this, Abaye said, if one had intercourse with a young woman, and she died, or if he raped a young woman, and she died before he was sentenced, so he is exempt from paying the fine. Why? Because the verse says, and the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman this fine, from which it is inferred, and not to the father of a dead girl. So the Gemara comments, this matter that was obvious to Abaye raised a dilemma for Rava, as Rava raised this dilemma. Is there achievement of grown woman status in the grave? Or is there not achievement of grown woman status in the grave? The law is that if a young woman is raped and the rapist did not pay the fine until she becomes a grown woman. He raped her while she was a young woman. But, it took a while to catch him, to bring him to trial, etc. And that period of a girl being a young woman is only about 6 months long, from when she first hits signs of puberty, and then for 6 months later, she's considered an adult woman. So if he rapes her while she's in that intermediate stage, but by the time he's tried and found guilty and he has to pay the fine, and marry her, by the way, if she chooses, and we're going to be talking more about that today, and then he can never divorce her, he has to support her all the days of his life. But at any rate, if he raped her while she was a young woman, and then, by the time he's brought to trial and he becomes obligated to pay the fine, she has become a grown woman. So are we going to say that he doesn't pay? What happens? The law is that if a young woman is raped and the rapist did not pay the fine until she became a grown woman, the rapist pays the fine. But he pays it to her and not to her father, since she's no longer under the authority of her father now that she's become an adult woman. Rava's dilemma is in a case where a young woman dies and her rapist was convicted only after the time elapsed that if she were alive, she would have reached grown woman status. So, is there achievement of grown woman status in the grave? Had she remained alive, she'd be a woman now, but she died. And therefore, and let's say in this case, she didn't die from the rape. She died for some other reason. So at the time that he became obligated to pay, she would have been a grown woman, but she died for some other reason. Maybe this was wartime, an accident happened, she caught a disease, who knows? But is he now going to get off the hook because his victim happened to die from some other cause? is there achievement of grown woman status while she's in the grave, and therefore she is entitled to the fine, and it becomes the property of her son as his mother's heir. Or perhaps there is no achievement of grown woman status in the grave, and the fine becomes the property of her father, as she was a young woman when she died. There's no discussion that the rapist gets off from paying the fine. It's just a question of who does he pay it to? Does he pay it to this woman if she has an heir, to the heir, right? If she had a son, or does he owe it to her father because at the time that he raped her, she was under the authority of her father? Now we're on page 39a. That was the bottom of 38b. Rav's dilemma is based on the assumption that a rape victim is able to conceive before she is a grown woman. Why is that the assumption? Because he's talking about if she has an heir. I mean, this is very unlikely, right? Such a young girl that she would have conceived and bore a son so that he can inherit his mother. But if that was the case, would the money be paid to the son or would it be paid to the woman's father? So can a woman conceive at such a young age? But didn't Rav Bevai teach a baraisa before Rav Nachman saying it is, and here we're not sure what the verb is. It is permitted for 3 women to engage in relations with a contraceptive resorbent. It is obligated for 3 women to engage in relations with a contraceptive resorbent, or it is encouraged for these 3 women to use a contraceptive. Unclear. It's just Rav Bevai said before Rav Nachman, 3 women engage in intercourse with this contraceptive resorbent in place, and these are they: a minor, a pregnant woman, and a nursing woman. Right? So is it that they're permitted, in which case other women are not permitted? Or is it that they're obligated because of their situation? Or is it that the sages are saying they would be wise to use a contraceptive if they're in this situation, which is a minor, a pregnant woman, or a nursing woman? And the Baraisa elaborates. A minor should use the contraceptive lest she conceive and die, because at such a young age, maybe it's possible for her to get pregnant, but her body is so underdeveloped that if she were to carry this baby to term, it would really endanger her and she might die from giving birth, especially with the medical system, of 2,000 years ago. A minor may do so lest she conceive and die. A pregnant woman, lest her existing fetus be crushed by another fetus and assume the shape of a sandalfish if she conceives a second time. And the nursing woman, lest she conceive, causing her milk to spoil, which will lead her to wean her son prematurely, endangering his health. Now, it's an assumption of ours with a little bit more advanced knowledge of women's biology, that once a woman is pregnant, she can't conceive a second child while there's already a child growing in her womb. And certainly she can get pregnant while she's nursing. There's advising a woman who is nursing should wait to get pregnant again because that can cause other problems. But this idea that one who is already pregnant shouldn't conceive another child, let's not be too quick to hold ourselves superior in knowledge of anatomy compared to the sages who lived 2,000 years ago. There actually are cases where one who is pregnant does get additionally pregnant. Super rare, but it has happened. And also there's the case of twins where one of them starts to sort of develop faster than the other and ends up kind of overcoming the other one, and the second twin never reaches fruition in the womb because he's sort of like the resources all go to the twin that grows into a baby and the other one doesn't make it. And that may be sort of part of what's going on here. It's also incidental to what we're talking about because they're just bringing that particular teaching to say that, well, apparently a minor girl can conceive and get pregnant. And the Baraisa further states, well, what is a minor girl? A minor girl is a girl, for the purposes of this teaching, we've said so far, a minor girl is just a girl who's less than the age when she starts to show puberty, usually 12 years and 1 day old, and has started to get hair on her pudendum. When she has 2 hairs, she's considered a young woman and no longer a minor. But now they're going to get a little more specific about this. So for this purposes, the Baraisa further states, what is a minor girl? A minor girl is one from 11 years and 1 day old until 12 years and 1 day old. If she is less than that age or more than that age, she's not going to be harmed by having sex, in the sense that less than that, obviously we would think of this as child rape. But in terms of, is she endangered by conceiving, which if she bore that child, if she carried that child, it might kill her. Less than 11, she just can't get pregnant. More than 12, in ancient times, especially when people had much shorter lifespans, it was, happened much more often that women would get married at such a young age. They're considered legal adults and capable of doing that, and they're less likely to have complications that will kill them once they get beyond that year, as it were. So less than that age or more than that age, she proceeds in her usual manner. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, both this woman and that woman, i.e., in the cases of all these women, she proceeds and engages in relations in her usual manner, and from heaven they will have mercy and prevent any mishap due to the fact that it is stated, the Lord preserves the simple. Psalm 116. So apparently, a minor is unable to conceive in the sense that, God won't let these children conceive until they can, once they can conceive, they can also carry the child. In the note here, there's strong disagreement about that. Some say, well, the Lord protects the simple as long as people take precautions to act in, what we would consider a normal, prudent manner. Then God protects the simple. But when people are endangered through factors beyond their control, or because they just, they don't know better, then maybe God will step in and protect them. But that's not something we rely on. We don't want to ever rely on a miracle, as it were. Yes, so that's what's going on. Okay, and so and if you say that she conceived when she was a young woman, 12 years old, and she gave birth when she was a young woman, so we're still asking, can she have an heir, such a young woman? So if you say that she conceived when she was a young woman, 12 years old, and she gave birth when she was a young woman, and died before she reached the status of a grown woman, can a woman give birth in 6 months after conception? But didn't Shmuel say there are only 6 months between becoming a young woman and then becoming a grown woman? So if you say that Shmuel is saying, well, it's less than 6 months, that there is not, Shmuel is saying that it is less than 6 months, that there is not transition from young woman to grown woman status. However, more than 6 months, there is transition, as different women develop differently, and therefore she could conceive and give birth during that period that she is a young woman. In other words, is Shmuel saying that it's 6 months at most, or is he saying that usually it's 6 months, or it's not less than 6 months? But for some women who just sort of develop more slowly, there is a period of being a young woman, which is even more than 9 months. And so therefore she could become pregnant and give birth all during that intermediate stage of being a young woman. So maybe that's what Shmuel was saying. However, Shmuel said there's only 6 months, indicating that the period is neither less nor more than 6 months. Rather, Rava's dilemma is unrelated to whether or not her son inherits the fine, right? So it's not. He's not saying that when he's asking, does she achieve grown woman status in the grave, and that therefore, even though she died like later after she was raped, but before the rapist was prosecuted and became liable to pay the fine, she died. So what would it mean that she became a grown woman? That maybe that the money flows to her son, her heir, rather than her father. Rather, Rava's dilemma is unrelated to whether or not her son inherits the fine. This is his dilemma. Is there achievement of grown woman status in the grave, and therefore the right of the father to receive payment of the fine lapsed? And since there is no one claiming the payment, the rapist need not pay. Right? So if the Torah says, in terms of, remember, that I keep saying it over and over. I'm sorry I'm a broken record. But the Torah distinguishes between the rapist's obligation to pay damages for pain and suffering, loss of livelihood, hospitalization, etc., and the specific fine for rendering her a non-virgin because he raped her. And this is going to replace the ketubah value of 200 dinar, which is what it means when it says he has to pay a fine of 50 silver sella. But that's only when the rapist attacks this woman while she's a young woman, more than a minor, less than a grown woman, and he pays it to the father. So if by the time he was prosecuted, she's no longer a young woman, we already have the principle, okay, so he pays her because it happened while she was a young woman. But what if she dies? So it's not paid to the father because it's owed to her because she's a grown woman, but she died. So does that mean that the rapist doesn't pay anybody because it's no longer for the father since she's now an adult and she herself is dead? Or perhaps there is no achievement of grown woman status in the grave and the right of the father did not lapse, so he just pays the father. Mar Bar Rav Ashi raised the dilemma like this. Does death effect grown woman status, or does it not effect grown woman status? And no resolution was found for this dilemma, and so the Gemara concludes that dilemma stands. Teku. We didn't get an answer for that. On a similar note, Rava inquired of Abaye, if the rapist forcibly had intercourse with a young woman, and she was later betrothed, what is the law? Abaye said to him, is it written, and he shall give to the father of the young woman who is not betrothed? Actually, it is written, if a man finds a young woman who was not betrothed, which indicates that the determining factor is whether or not she was betrothed before the rape, and not whether she is engaged at the moment of payment, not whether she is betrothed at the moment he becomes liable, he's found guilty, and he has to pay the money. Rava asked, and according to your reasoning, that which was taught in a baraisa, if he forcibly had intercourse with a young woman and she later married, the fine is paid to her, not to her father. There too, ask, is it written, and he shall give to the father of the young woman who is not married? It doesn't say that. Even though the verse does not address the moment of payment, if she married, the fine is paid to her. And Abaye answered, how can these cases be compared? They are in the case of marriage. There is reason to diverge from the plain meaning of the verse, as grown woman status removes her from the authority of her father, and marriage removes her from the authority of her father. Just as with regard to grown woman status, if he forcibly had intercourse with her and she became a grown woman, the fine is paid to her, as we said. If he raped a young woman and by the time he's liable to pay the money, she has become a grown woman, he pays her instead of her father. So likewise, if she gets married in the meantime, the fact that she gets married affects her grown woman status, and it has the same result. He raped her while she was a young woman who had not been betrothed. Later, after the rape, she gets married, and so even though she hasn't actually aged out of being a young woman, the fact that she gets married affects grown woman status, removes her from the authority of her father, and therefore, when the rapist becomes liable to pay, he pays her rather than her father. However, with regard to betrothal, does it remove her from the authority of her father entirely the way marriage does? Didn't we learn in a Mishna? With regard to a betrothed young woman, her father and her husband must come together to nullify her vows. A woman who is betrothed while she's in that young woman status, if she makes a vow, before when she was a minor, if she made a vow, her father could nullify her vow. After she's married, her husband can nullify her vow. But if she's a young woman who is betrothed, in order to have her vow nullified, both her husband and her father have to come together to nullify the vow. Therefore, she's not fully removed from the authority of her father. So apparently, betrothal does not remove her entirely from her father's authority, and therefore the law with regard to betrothal cannot be derived from the law with regard to grown woman status. And therefore, Rava's question is not difficult. The betrothal was before the money gets paid to her father. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Here comes Mishnah number 4. The seducer gives the father of his victim 3 things, and the rapist gives the father 4. And the Mishnah explains. The seducer gives the father of the young woman. Remember, this Torah provision, this Torah law, spells out that the rapist and the seducer of a young woman, right? The defined term, no longer a minor, not yet a grown woman, has to pay the fine, the 50 sela, which is equivalent to 200 dinar, to her father. But that's not all he owes to the father, right? The seducer gives 3 things and the rapist gives 4. The seducer gives the father payments for humiliation, degradation, and the fine. A rapist adds an addition to his payments as he also gives payment for the pain. And what are the differences between the law of a rapist and that of a seducer? The rapist gives payment for the pain, and the seducer does not give payment for the pain. The rapist gives payment immediately, and the seducer does not pay those payments immediately, but only when he releases her. That will be explained. The rapist drinks from his vessel, atzitzo, i.e., he marries the woman he raped per force, and the seducer, if he wishes to release her, he releases her. The rapist is obligated to marry her and he can never divorce her. The seducer is not obligated to marry her. He's obligated to pay the fine, but he's not obligated to marry. The Mishna clarifies, and recall that it's up to, and this is going to be explained in a moment, that it's up to the girl whether she wants to marry the rapist or not. He does not have a choice. He must marry her if she chooses that, and he has to support her all the days of his life, and he can never divorce her. It's up to her whether she wants to marry him or not. The Mishnah clarifies, how does the rapist drink from his vessel? What does this mean? It means that even if the woman he raped is lame, even if she is blind, and even if she is afflicted with boils, he is obligated to marry her, and he may never divorce her. However, if a matter of licentiousness is found in her, for example, if she committed adultery, or if she is unfit to enter the Jewish people because she's a mamzeret, then he is not permitted to sustain her as a wife. In other words, she's otherwise disqualified from marriage for some other reason outside the events of the rape. Then he is not permitted to sustain her as a wife. Then it is stated, and to him she shall be as a wife, from which it is inferred that she must be a woman who is legally permitted to him as a wife. Now the Gemara on Mishnah number 4. The Mishnah taught that a rapist pays for the pain that he caused. So the Gemara asks, for what pain is he obligated to pay? And Shmuel's father said it is for the pain he caused when he slammed her onto the ground while raping her. And Rabbi Zera strongly objects to this. But if what you say is so, then if he slammed her onto a silk bed, so too is the law that he is exempt from the payment for pain. Right? So it's that law of unintended consequences that they're being very careful about. It sounds like, well, yeah, if he hurt her while he was raping her, in the sense that he hurt her body by slamming her on a wall or on the floor, or he punched her, things like that. So then that's why he's paying for the pain. But then it's like, well, what if he managed to rape her without doing those particular things? Does he not pay the pain? We want him to pay the damages for pain. So you have to be very careful about how you define and measure these damages for pain. That's what they're saying. That's what Rabbi Zera is saying. So, and if you indeed say that it is so, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, a rapist does not pay for the pain due to the fact that she will does not pay for the pain due to the fact that she will ultimately suffer the same pain during intercourse when under the authority of her husband. They're saying, well, maybe the pain is simply that this was the first time she had sex. And that always involves pain. So that's the pain that the rapist pays for. And they're saying, no, we can't define it that way, because every woman who enters marriage as a virgin, makes love for the first time. And maybe that's painful. That's not the same as being raped. So we have to be more careful with the definition. They said to him, one who has intercourse against her will is not comparable to one who has intercourse willingly. The pain associated with rape is a direct result of the forced intercourse and not of some associated cause. Of course a rapist causes pain to his rape victim because she's having sex unwillingly, and that causes physical pain. So rather, Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avu said This pain that he pays for refers to the pain of spreading her legs during intercourse. And likewise, the verse says, Ezekiel 16:25, and you opened your legs to every passerby. I don't know how that's the proof text, but the point is simple that they're making, that no, it is not comparable being raped to making love for the first time. There might be pain associated with both, but the pain associated with being raped is much greater. So the Gemara asks, if so, a seduced woman should also be obligated to make the payment as well, right? If you're saying that there's pain every time a woman has sex for the first time, well, then the seducer should also pay the damages for pain. Rav Nachman said that Rabbi Bar Abu stated a parable, not an incident, but a parable. To what can this matter of a seducer be compared? It can be compared to a person who said to another, tear my silk and be exempt from payment. Since she engaged in relations of her own volition, she certainly absolved him of payment for the pain, right? That's what we've seen. The rapist has the additional aspect of the damages. Both of them humiliated the girl, but the rapist pays for her pain. The seducer does not, because she was complicit. She agreed, right? Because she agreed, it's not rape. We're not talking about statutory rape here. That's a modern law. That wasn't part of this analysis. So the seducer, right, is one who convinced this girl to participate willingly, so she doesn't get damages for pain like the rape victim does. The Gemara asks, tear my silk. It is not her silk. It is not her silk. And therefore she may not waive payment for damage. It is the silk of her father, as the fine and the other payments are paid to him. And now you have that insight into, the real world economics of ancient times, right? That the father decided who his his daughter, who's a young woman, he decides who she'll marry. And if she's not a virgin, because she was either raped or seduced, so she receives a smaller marriage contract, and it is much more difficult to marry her off. That has financial consequences for the father. So this payment of damages, right, which our Mishna says, doesn't go to her, right? It happened while she was a young woman, so the damages go to her father. So why would we say that the damages for pain, which she doesn't get because she participated in it willingly, but it wasn't her right to participate in it willingly, right? It was still her father's property, as it were, legally speaking. Therefore, Rav Nachman said that Rabbi Bar Abu said that the clever women among them say that a seduced woman has no pain during intercourse, as she is a willing participant, and not that she invited him in, and like she participated in the crime, and therefore the damages don't get paid. But rather, the simple distinction is a woman who's raped has more pain in that relations than a woman who participates in it willingly, which seems to make sense. The Gemara asks, but don't we see, and we're on 39b, by the way, but don't we see that even a married woman has pain when she engages in sexual relations for the first time? Why don't we just say there was pain? It was for the first time, especially if she's so young. There must have been pain, and so the seducer should pay, just like the rapist. Even married women who are adults had pain when the first time they have sex. And Abaye said, well, my foster mother told me that the pain is like hot water on the head of a bald man. And Rava said, my wife, Rav Chizda's daughter, told me that it is like the stab of a bloodletting knife, which is like a little medical procedure. And Rav Papa said, my wife, Abasura's daughter, told me that it is like the feeling of hard bread on the gums. When a woman engages in intercourse willingly, there might be some pain, but it's negligible compared to the pain of a rape. Therefore, the seducer is not obligated to pay for the pain. That's as far as they're going to go with offering reasons why the seducer doesn't pay for pain. That's the law. The rapist does pay for pain. The seducer doesn't. He still pays for other damages, right? What else does he pay for? For humiliation and degradation, right? I mean, because it got out. The news got out that this man seduced that girl. It harmed her reputation very much. And then she's going to be humiliated because of that. And he pays. He pays for that. He shouldn't have done it. He should have known better. The Mishnah continues. The rapist gives his payment immediately. The seducer only pays when he releases her. And the Gemara asks, when he releases her, is she his wife? He did not yet marry her. So how can the Mishnah use this verb, releases her, which is the language of divorce? And Abaye said, say that he gives payment when he opts not to marry her. If he marries her, he need not pay. That opinion was also taught in a Baraisa. Although they said that the seducer gives the fine when he opts not to marry her, the compensation for her humiliation and degradation, that he gives immediately. Now we see a clear distinction between the fine for rape or seduction versus the damages for humiliation and degradation. Right? So the damages he owes right away. The fine for rendering her not a virgin, he can get out of paying that if he marries her. That's his option. If he rapes her, he doesn't have that option. Then he must marry her and pay her father. So, although they said the seducer gives the fine when he opts not to marry her, the compensation for her humiliation and degradation he gives immediately. And the Baraisa continues, although both the rapist and the seducer are obligated to marry their victim, both she and her father are able to prevent the marriage. What? Didn't he just say that the seducer can release her? He can get out of it. No. He has to marry her, but he can divorce her. The rapist cannot, apparently. So the Gemara asks, granted, with regard to a woman who was seduced, it is written, if her father refuses ma'en yema'en to give her to him, and the sages interpreted, I've only derived that her father has the right to prevent her marriage to the seducer or the rapist. From where do we derive that she herself can also refuse? The verse states this doubled verb, ma'en yema'en, a double verb indicating that the marriage can be prevented in any case, meaning she also has the option not to get married to her rapist or seducer. However, from where is it derived that they can prevent the marriage in the case of a rapist? That was just for the seducer. Granted, she herself can prevent the marriage as it is written, and to him she shall be as a wife, and the term shall be indicates with her consent. However, from where do we derive that her father can prevent the marriage to the rapist? And Abaye said no verse is necessary, as it stands to reason that the father too can prevent the marriage, so that the sinner will not profit. If her father could not prevent the marriage, the rapist would acquire the right to marry the young woman despite the father's refusal, a right not accorded to one who seeks to betroth a young woman in a conventional manner. He is forced to marry her if the father says yes and the daughter says yes. He doesn't have a choice, but the father and the girl have a choice, just as a man who's in the normal course of things seeks to betroth a woman, the girl has a choice and the father has a choice. When she's a minor, she might not have a choice, but certainly the father has a choice. And so therefore the father's not going to lose that choice when his daughter is raped. And Abaye said, no verse is necessary, as it stands to reason that the father too can prevent the marriage, so that a sinner will not profit. If her father could not prevent the marriage, the rapist would acquire the right to marry the young woman despite her father's refusal, which one seeking to betroth does not have. Rava said, it is derived through a kal v'chomer inference, and a fortiori inference, just as in the case of a seducer who contravened only her father's will, as she acquiesced to his proposition. She participated in it. The rapist, he contradicted the will of both the girl and the father. The seducer got her to participate in it, so he only contravened the will of the father. So just as in the case of a seducer who contravened only her father's will, since she acquiesced, nevertheless, both she and her father can prevent the marriage, then in the case of a rapist who contravened both her father's will and her own will, all the more so, is it not that both she and her father can prevent the marriage? And the Gemara elaborates, Rava did not say in accordance with the explanation of Abaye, as, since the rapist pays the fine, he is not a sinner who profits, as he too must pay the dowry of a virgin even if he marries her. Likewise, Abaye did not say in accordance with the explanation of Rava, because in the case of a seducer, where the seducer himself can prevent the marriage, her father can also prevent the marriage. In the case of a rapist, where the rapist himself cannot prevent the marriage, her father also cannot prevent the marriage. I'm a little confused because now this accords with my original earlier understanding that the seducer is not obligated to marry her and can never divorce her, like the rapist. The rapist, for sure, he must marry her if she and her father agree, and he can never divorce her. Now I'm unclear, must the seducer marry her or not? Seems like in this argument he can get out of it. He has a choice whether to marry her or not. It was taught in another Baraisa. Although the sages said that the rapist gives payment immediately, when he releases her, she has no claim upon him. And the Gemara asks, when he releases her, how can he release her? It is prohibited by Torah law for him to do so. Rather, amend the Baraisa and say, when she leaves, if she seeks to divorce her rapist and demands a bill of divorce, she has no monetary claim upon him because he already paid the fine, which is equivalent to a virgin's marriage contract. And similarly, if he died, the money of the fine that she or her father received offsets the marriage contract. There's not another payment of a marriage contract in this case of the rapist. The fine, which was the equivalent of the dowry of virgins, replaces her marriage contract. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, even a rape victim has a marriage contract of 100 dinars, like the marriage contract of all non-virgin wives. So in a sense, it becomes 300 dinar in the case of the rapist. Right? He pays the 200 dinar in the form of 50 sela because he raped her. That's the fine. And another 100 as the marriage contract, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they disagree? And the Gemara explains, I'm almost done. If you have questions, get them in. The rabbis maintain, what is the reason that the sages instituted a marriage contract for the woman, the rape victim? They instituted it so that she will not be inconsequential in his eyes, enabling him to easily divorce her. Because divorcing her will cost money. He will not do so rashly. And this woman whom he raped, he cannot release her by Torah law, which obviates the need for a marriage contract. So you wouldn't add this additional 100 dinar. But Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, with regard to this woman too, although he cannot divorce her, he can torment her until she says, I don't want you, at which point she would initiate a divorce, and then he can divorce her. Therefore, the sages instituted that she receives that marriage contract of a non-virgin to prevent him from tormenting her and getting her to desire a divorce from him. And we leave off there. Okay. Tough stuff. Let's go to questions. On page 39. Lesuk and Eugenia. How do they determine if it is a seduction or a rape? What a good question. What a good question. You're saying that the rapist claims it was a seduction and she says it was a rape. So then there's going to be some kind of testimony. Presumably if there's witnesses, that's a simple answer. But if there's not witnesses, is she believed to say that she would never participate in this and she was raped? I don't know if we've answered that. I don't know that we had an answer to that specific question thus far in the discussion. My sense is, like we've had other cases in Tractate Yevamos and here where a woman is believed. And I think this is one of them, right? Because the daughters of Israel are not promiscuous. So the presumption is that if he ended, she doesn't admit that she was seduced, but he admits that they had sex, then they're in the realm of a rape, and he's going to have to prove that it wasn't a rape. I think that's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer is. Perhaps it'll be answered as we move forward. Sharon, how is the humiliation, degradation, and pain addressed by paying a fine to her father? Is the father subsequently obligated to use those funds for the girl's benefit? I guess the answer is he's 100. If she's still under his authority, he's obligated in everything that she needs, right? He can't turn around and use that money to go play poker with his buddies. She's under his care. He has the obligations of any father toward his daughter to take care of her. So if, the humiliation and degradation caused to her, for example, requires therapy, the father's responsible for that. but it's a good question. And maybe that also helps explain that other principle that they just kind of alluded to in passing, just assumed it was right, that if she becomes a grown woman before the fine becomes, is extracted from the seducer or the rapist, that it goes to her and not to the father because she's not under his authority and, the money has to be used for her, so it goes directly to her. Lessig and Eugenia, where did you get that quote from Ezekiel? A woman raped doesn't open her legs. She fights with all her might as there's payment for the physical. Exactly. I didn't understand why they were using that quote. I don't think that they were saying, the whole point is that she doesn't do it willingly. What they were saying, I think, the quote from Ezekiel is that opening the legs is simply part of the process of having sex. And because, and so that part, if it causes pain, can be, this is what they're saying. If the opening, if forcing her to spread her legs against her will causes her pain, that's a different stage in the rape than penetration, right? And so what they're separating is other elements of the rape from the penetration itself, because that follows on the discussion of, the pain is when he throws her against the ground, or the pain is when he hits her head or punches her, throws her against a wall, something terrible like that. And that's separate from the penetration. So that's what they were suggesting, but they refuted that point of view and said the simple answer is any woman who's raped suffers terrible pain and is compensated for it. They just examined alternatives to that and said, yeah, no, that's a wrong argument, wrong-headed, and they concluded exactly what you're saying. Gwen, is that the reason that women are blamed for being raped so that the men don't have to pay? Yeah, I mean, right? They're going to make that argument that it wasn't really a rape to escape consequences. I mean, not just paying the fine or paying the damages, but all of it, right? I mean, this man is guilty of a horrific crime, and there's going to be tremendous consequences. So he's going to try to convince, his brethren in the patriarchal society that, it wasn't rape. But as you can see, the Torah explains that there is rape and there are consequences for rape, and we don't believe rapists who say they didn't rape, and there are specific consequences for rape, and there's going to be a trial and to ascertain exactly what happened. That's why they make the argument. It's not a winning argument, and God willing, all rapists get fully prosecuted, punished, caught, and made to pay to the full extent of the law. And as we mentioned yesterday, the law of the land is also the law, as long as it doesn't contradict, Jewish law. And the law of the land now, right, is a rapist goes through the whole trial, he goes to prison, he pays, damages under secular law, tort law, etc. And all of that is in play. We don't say that, well, Jewish law is different than American criminal law, and therefore we're going to skate on American criminal law. No way. You do have these situations that are terrible, right, where kind of community doesn't want to give up some prominent member to be prosecuted under secular law, and that has caused tremendous injustice in the past. But that issue has really come to the forefront in recent years in much the same way that the Me Too movement brought these kinds of issues forward. It's also happening within very kind of closed off religious communities, both Jewish communities and other religions too. And silence is no longer tolerated. And these rapists are handed over to the law. Caleb Grayson, are two witnesses required? I mean, I'm not sure. Is this one of those cases where her testimony is enough because it's not possible that there are? Maybe what you have is two witnesses who saw that they were secluded, or two witnesses that saw that this man was stalking her. So that becomes very strong evidence against him. But then how does the actual criminal trial go? That's not actually what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about once it's established that there was a rape, what are the damages, what is the fine, what are the consequences, and how does that intersect with the law of marriage contracts. This actually isn't the part of the Talmud where we're establishing criminal law procedure. So we got to be very careful to understand that distinction. We're not going to get all the answers to these questions because we're really only talking about the law of damages and consequences, not how do we establish guilt. So we just haven't answered that, and the answers to those questions might not come in this volume. Criminal law is examined much more closely in Tractate Sanhedrin and in a number of other places around the Talmud. So we'll see. I don't remember offhand from my last journey through the Gemara whether we're going to examine it here in Kesubos. You know, I prepare each day for that day's page. I haven't read way ahead. So we'll see. We're going to get the answers to these questions. I'm just not sure when. All right, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 40 here in Tractate Kesubos. Keep reading, keep learning, and may the merit of our learning today accrue to the healing of the victims of terror in Jerusalem last night. May they have a refuah shlema. We say amen, and have a good night.